Well, in Ezekiel chapter 35 today, and another exciting chapter, and a chapter that's transitioning us into this section that talks about the restoration of Israel. It's the overall theme. So, in this chapter, I've called this Israel's Enemies Destroyed. What's in view here, if you look at verse 1, for example, or verse 2, it says, set your face against Mount Seir. Mount Seir is a reference to the country of Edom. You can verify that by looking at verse 15 of this chapter. Edom was kind of Israel's perennial enemy. Starts with the battle between Jacob and Esau in Rebekah's womb in chapter 25. Continues with the deception by Jacob of Esau in Genesis 27. And I think in the context of this section of the book of Ezekiel, I think Edom is really standing in the place of or represents all of the enemies of Israel who are going to be defeated when Israel takes full possession or possession of the full land that was promised to them, and they are vindicated by God. Now, historically, Edom was an ally of Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. So they're being brought under judgment for their treatment of Israel in accordance with Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. We can outline this particular chapter with three headings. Judgment is declared in verses 1 through 5. Judgment's described in verses 6 through 9. Judgment's determined in verses 10 through 15. So judgment declared, described, and determined here. Let's take a look at verses 1 through 5. Notice that God himself is declaring through Ezekiel that he's going to bring desolation to Edom. God's going to lay waste to their cities in verses 3 through 5. And when this prophecy is fulfilled against them, they'll know that he is Lord. They'll know that he rules. Look at verse 5. Note the word because there. Because is the listing for us the first reason that God is bringing judgment against Edom. It's because of their hatred of Israel and their refusal to help them. But rather they gave them over and even participated in Nebuchadnezzar's destruction of God's people and his temple. Also note in verse 5 that word enmity. I'm looking at an NASB Bible. You may have something slightly different. It says, because you have had everlasting enmity. This is kind of an echo of Genesis 3:15, where there's going to be enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. Edom's hatred of Israel, in other words, is seen as a kind of a continuation or a development of that original enmity between Satan's offspring and the offspring of the woman. It's an enmity that continues today in the opposition of the world to Israel, and also in the opposition of the world to Israel's Messiah and those who might follow him. That's you and I, brothers and sisters. In verses 6 through 9, we see judgment described. Notice in verse 6 that bloodshed is repeated 4 times. Gives you a sense of what's going to happen, the slaughter that's going to happen in Edom when this judgment is fulfilled. Verse 7, it says that he will cut off from it the one who passes through and returns. Cut off is really a euphemism for kill that we see in the Old Testament. And what it's saying, I think, here is that Edom is going to be basically dead to the nations and to the world. People will be passing back and forth through it, but it'll be such a waste and desolation that it's going to be as if it were dead, cut off. As he continues to describe the judgment, look at verse 8. Slain is mentioned twice. Halal is the Hebrew word here, which talks about a fatally wounded person, or a fatal wound is a halal. So the nation is going to be filled with people either dead or dying from these fatal wounds that they've received under judgment. Verse 9 talks about a everlasting desolation. And we know the cities of Edom were destroyed by successive invasions, and those cities stand empty today. In 126 BC, Edom was taken over by the Hasmonean dynasty and continued for quite a long time. King Herod himself was a Hasmonean, an Idumean, and was kind of a continuation of that enmity between the seed of Satan and the seed of the woman, to the extent that he attempted to have the Messiah murdered. Later, Arab nomads known as Nabateans conquered Edom and took over Edom. And today, this country is known as the country of Jordan, just east of Israel. But these cities themselves have been destroyed. Finally, in verses 10 through 15, we see judgment determined. Notice again, because, a further reason that God gives for the judgment. That reason is their desire to displace Israel from the land that God has given them. The Edomites' desire for Israel's land is really an affront to God. It's rejecting what God has established, rejecting the fact that God has awarded them that land, and it's affront to God ultimately, and that's why they're being judged. Note verse 11 as well. It says that God will deal with you according to your anger and according to your envy. This is establishing a principle that we see throughout the Old Testament and into the New. It's called the principle of lex talionis, which is a Latin word meaning literally the law of retaliation. It simply means that the punishment fits the crime. Or as Galatians says, what you sow is what you reap. That God judges according to or in proportion to what nations have done. Verse 14 talks about worldwide rejoicing, and that's going to happen when Israel's enemies are defeated and the Messiah reigns. So we're talking here about not a near-term victory over Israel's enemies at that time or at this time, but rather a future victory over Israel's enemies that's talked about in Isaiah chapter 44, Isaiah chapter 49, and Jeremiah chapter 51. There'll be worldwide rejoicing. Verse 15 then closes out the chapter with another reference to that proportional judgment that God's going to bring on Edom. Notice as it says, as you rejoiced, and then it closes out, so will I do to you. So again, in terms of application, I think we can reflect on this, that we reap what we sow. For those of us who are believers, the degree to which we enjoy, really relish our salvation is proportionate to the degree to which we obey the Lord. That an obedient Christian is a happy Christian, a disobedient Christian is miserable. So brothers and sisters, I pray that you are enjoying, in fact, your salvation, that you enjoy the life that the Lord has given you, that you are enjoying what He is doing in and through you. And I pray that if you are not enjoying your life as a Christian, if you are feeling as if you are under God's judgment, I pray that you heed that and bring yourself into obedience with God's word, that you may fully enjoy now the salvation that He has awarded to you. God bless you, brothers and sisters. May you be a joyful Christian.